Okay, looks like we have a number of folks that have joined us, and a few more will, I'm sure, trickle in. But let's get started so we don't take time away from today's presentation. Welcome to this month's Less Stress Parenting. We are going to be having a wonderful discussion, and we're going to hear from Alex Chip from Top Score Education. They provide amazing one-on-one test prep for the variety of standardized tests that exist today and the new ones that are coming very soon. So today's topic, we're going to talk about the new digital SAT, how it impacts your kids, how it impacts studying, and all the changes that come with it as well. So let me turn it over to Alex, but before I do, a couple of administrative housekeeping matters. One, if you have questions, please put them in the chat box and we will get to them at the end. We have left time for question and answers at the end, and we look forward to hearing from you. We do want this to be a little bit interactive so that we can hear what your questions are, because there's a lot of information that Alex is going to share today. Secondarily, if you have any concerns or you're having trouble with the webinar, please, you can always email us back from the invitation, or if you're having trouble, please put it also in the chat box so that I can address it. We really thank you for your time. We know that you don't have a lot of it and appreciate that you're giving it to us today. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Alex, who is not only a great person for test prep, but Alex and his team are good friends and wonderful people that we refer to all the time. And we really look forward to hearing from them today. So with that, Alex, can I hand it over to you?
Great. Well, thanks so much, Wendy. I really appreciate it, and also appreciate you having me here today. I'm really excited to talk about the digital SAT. To me, this is something that whenever there's a change in a test, it means a lot of work for us, frankly, as we go sort of into that mode of saying, what is the College Board saying about these changes, and what are they saying that's actually true? Where's the transparency? What is sort of hidden under the shroud? And we're constantly trying to put light on the shadows and get information here to provide to our students. And when we can, then it's sort of this, all of this work that we've been doing behind the scenes, we get to present in something like this and help parents to understand something that otherwise, would take hours of kind of blog searching through the internet for. So I'm excited to be here today. My background, I've been doing this for 20 years. I grew up in DC, went to Duke for college, graduated in 2004. Started doing a master's in writing at Johns Hopkins and started tutoring and teaching. And I just loved it so much. And in particular, the SAT and the ACT. I know a lot of people, my friends still ask me, how can for 2 decades you have been working with these same 2 tests? And for me, there's something so interesting about the static nature of the tests and the dynamic nature of the students. And that combination for me has been something that made every day different, and why I still continue to do it and why I love it so much. And I still teach 5-6 days a week because I love that combination of a learnable test and students with all of the, all the empathy you need to help them get to where they want to be. And so we've been doing it one-on-one in the DC area, North Carolina, Miami, and virtually for 20 years now. And I've attracted a lot of tutors like me who love teaching, who are passionate about what they do, many from Duke as well. And we sort of all are under the same philosophical umbrella of deep learning through deep relationships. And every tutor that I've had come through Top Score and work with me had to commit to that same philosophy of always looking to build a relationship with the family and understand how that mattered as much as the formulas you're teaching in the math. And this is where I think that we have a lot of overlap with Illuminos, and why I'm so excited in particular to speak to this audience, because for us, everything has always been about that personalization and the relationships. We put so much effort, and this is important for parents to know, as you begin your process, effort needs to go into figuring out when is the best timeline for my student, because it's not the same for everybody. You have to say, who's the best personality match for my student? As a tutor mentor, it needs to be somebody who's going to inspire them to their own greatness. And then what is the program, what is the test choice that's going to be the best for my students' skill set? And that can be a really nuanced decision. And so all of that takes time, and you have to be willing to invest that. And that's, I know Illuminos does that for their families, and I know that we do that. And everything we do comes from the starting point of empathy, of understanding how overwhelmed these kids feel. And to me, it works on 3 levels. They feel overwhelmed by the page, by the test, by life. And what that means, by the page, on the page, they've got a word problem and it feels like it's 5 miles long and they don't know how to start. And you feel like you're out in the ocean when you've got a hard problem and you don't know what step 1 is. On the test itself, on the ACT, for instance, it's 4 subjects, 5 years of math. It's so much content, it can feel overwhelming. And then in life, for a student, high school's hard enough already. And then they feel this extra added burden of college admissions in general, and then test preparation more specifically. And they come home, and you know that feeling of watching your student come in the door and seeing their face and seeing their shoulders hunched, and you can really feel that tangible sense of being overwhelmed. And what we always try to do for our students is to show them that it all starts with a deep breath and a simple step. And so I hope that today's conversation here, for parents who might be feeling a little overwhelmed by this process, by a big test change, that today's discussion can be one that provides a deep breath and a simple first step towards greater knowledge around these tests. So this overview, you see some bullet points here. Each of these topics I could talk about for an hour. We're going to be here talking for about 30 minutes and have plenty of time for question and answer. So I'm going to be talking about general SAT versus ACT overview, as well as general timeline. How long does it take to prepare for these exams? When can you start? And some of these decisions also cross boundaries from the digital SAT to the ACT. So we'll be talking about both of these tests in terms of you have to understand the context of both to understand the new digital SAT and what it means about your selection, your test selection process, and how you move forward. I'm very excited to talk about some of these changes, the digital SAT. I want to make sure that I'm doing more than just telling you the what. I don't want to just give you a bullet point list of the changes on the exam. I think you could find that online fairly readily. I want to give you the so what. I want to talk about here are the changes, but what does this mean for your student particularly? So we're going to be talking about that, about the digital SAT. And while it's going to be a fairly high level overview of some of these topics, there's definitely time in the Q&A to get to some of the details. I don't like to say the devil is in the details because the SAT is nefarious enough without calling it the devil. So let's just say the majestic is in the minutia. And when we get to that Q&A or along the way, please put in the chat box questions as specific as you want to make them. I'm happy to delve very deep into any part of this conversation or outside of it. Whatever are the questions that you have, I want to make sure that I answer at the end of today. So our general SAT and ACT overview here, you might know some of this already, but I want to make sure that we start from the foundations. The tests are about 3 hours and 15 minutes plus breaks, the SAT, paper SAT today and the ACT. They're taken during generally junior year or senior fall for college admission. The new digital SAT is going to debut in the US, at least, in March of 2024. This test is going to be now 2 hours and 14 minutes long, so almost exactly 1 hour less. And the digital PSAT is going to show up this October in just 1 month, and that will be taken at the schools. I'll go just a little bit more into detail about the PSAT in a future slide here. As far as all colleges accepting ACT and SAT, there's no preference for one over the other. There's no bias for one over the other, so you don't have to worry about that. You're going to pick the test that's better for your kid's skill set, not because you think this region of the country likes this test better. It doesn't work like that anymore. As far as registering for the test, collegeboard.org for the SAT, actstudent.org for the ACT. And one thing that's more important than, and you can always look up online and Google where these websites are, more important for you to know is that you've got to register pretty far in advance. It's not like a, Taylor Swift concert where you got to be at the button to press it, but the best test centers, the ones that are, if you live in Washington, D.C., there's test centers in Montgomery County that fill up very quickly. Whenever there's a test change, people just always freak out and assume they're going to take that test, so they sign up even if they might not take it. So definitely plan ahead. Think about which test dates your student's going to do, and make sure you sign up on the early side rather than on the late side for these exams. As far as how many times students should plan to take the test, generally, you're going to pick your better test at the outset. Figure out what's the better test for your skills as a student and prepare, and then take the test 2 to 3 times over a course of 4 to 6 months. That's a good general timeline to think about for your students. Why we take it 2 to 3 times, 2 major reasons, it's experience and super scoring. The experience, every time a student goes in, they build kind of a harder shell to the external factors that are flying around their head when they go to take a real SAT. I go and I take the ACT and SAT in the high schools with the students, and I'm sweating out of every pore of my body because just being there, the proctor's there, it's scary. The other kids are sweaty. It kind of smells a little bit. You're always either too cold or too hot in the room. There's so much externally going on that when you go and sit there for your first test, it can be really overwhelming. And so you want to plan to take it 2 or 3 times. Every time you're in there, you build that outer shell and you're able to focus more and more on the test in front of you rather than what's going on around you. And then super scoring, we're going to talk about more in this slide upcoming. That's a major factor for taking the test multiple times. So what super scoring is that you can take the test multiple times and you get to keep your best scores from across the different test dates. So the best way, let's look at this graphic. This is an ACT super scoring example, but you can super score for the SAT or the ACT. So this student, for instance, took the test in April, okay, and got scores 19 in English, 20 math, 23 reading, 21 science, and a 21 composite, which is the average of those 4 subject scores. They retook it in June, and you can see their English score. Maybe they spent a lot of time studying grammar, their grammar rules, their semicolons, and subject-verb agreement, and their score went up from a 19 to a 22. So now their best English score across the 2 tests is a 22. Their math score also went up, but their reading score went down. It went down from a 23 to a 20 in June. But because of super scoring, they get to keep the 22 better English score from June, and they get to take that 23 from the reading in April. And then you can see they come back in September and achieve their best math score. And now you've got a new test made up of those best scores, and their super composite score is going to average out to a 23, which is higher than any of their individual test days. Now, this score improvement is not typical of a top score student. I promise there will be higher score raises than 21, 22, 21. But the super scoring is what we're looking at here, and that's how it works. Same way for the SAT. You go and take a test, you get a verbal score out of 800 and a math score out of 800. This is the same for the current paper SAT and the new digital SAT that's coming out. And if you go and you take the test again and your verbal goes up, but your math goes down, you get to keep the higher math from the first test day, the higher verbal from the second test day for your new super score. And so, of course, that incentivizes taking the test multiple times, because even if you do better on any one subject, you've improved your overall standing for college admissions. Now, do all schools accept super scoring? And the answer is no, not all schools. Almost all do for the SAT, many do for the ACT, but not all. So there are some schools that won't allow you to submit a super score. You just have to submit your best single day score. Now, some students will say, well, can I just take the test 6, 7 times and hope that I do a great job in one subject each time? And realistically, the answer is no. You take the test when you've prepared to improve your scores. A lot of studies have shown that if no preparation, or individual or with somebody preparing for the exam has been done, it's unlikely that you're going to highly increase your score. So you don't take the test 6 times. You take the test when you've done some preparation and you feel confident that your score is going to go up in at least one subject. So as far as our testing timeline, because these 2 things go hand in hand, it's not really a chicken and egg situation. You have to pick a test, the SAT or the ACT, and you have to pick what period of time am I going to do the preparation and take these exams. Traditionally, and when I say traditionally, I mean back when I was in high school in the late 1990s, everybody took it in the spring of junior year and then prepared in the summer and then took it again in fall of senior year, and that was it. Kind of everybody did the same thing. Now students can test year-round. The ACT or the SAT is offered in every month but January of the year. That's great. It offers a lot of choices, but of course, with all of the permutations of when you can test, it does make picking when you actually do that process a little bit more convoluted. So you have more choices. It means more thought needs to go into when you're going to do that preparation. 2 major factors that I'll start with, actually the lesser factor, is curriculum considerations, mostly being math-based. Math is far and away the subject on both tests that contains the most content that you're actually going to study from what you've learned in school. The SAT, this goes for both paper, and the new digital SAT goes through the end of Algebra 2. The ACT goes through the end of pre-calculus. Now, that would imply that, oh, well, if you're taking the ACT, you really have to wait and take it later in the process, maybe later in junior year when you've had more pre-calculus, if you're taking pre-calculus as a junior. However, I don't want to overstate the importance of where you are in your math curriculum to which test you're going to choose. Yes, the ACT tests more advanced math, but that more advanced math at a maximum on the ACT, that pre-calculus, is around 15 to 20% of the math, probably closer to 15%, which means it's only about 5% or less of your total overall ACT score. So you do not want to be basing when you prepare for your exams solely on when you're going to have covered every possible math fact. Much more important is the time considerations. When is your student going to have time to prepare for these exams, whichever one it is? Students are going to have after-school sports. They have spring musicals. They have AP exams. Some schools have finals. You've got all of these considerations. When is my student going to have time, motivation, and maturity to prepare for the exams? Some parents say, well, let's do it in the summer after sophomore year. He's got all this free time. But that student is 16 and wants to learn how to drive, not, hang out with Alex Chip and talk about ACT science question types, so you've got to think about motivation and maturity of the student as well. And so the time consideration is much more important than the curriculum consideration in my point of view. Think of the test prep as a 4 to 6 month time commitment. And here I've given 4 examples of different kind of starting points that a student might take and when they would plan to have test attempts. None of these examples is inherently better than any of the others. Each one of these would be the best possible test prep program for an individual student whose activities, math considerations, maturity level dictated that this is the best time for that student to prepare. So now getting a little bit more into the digital PSAT and SAT, which is of course why we're here today. I'll start with the international digital SAT, which is already out there. They started in March internationally. So they've been doing that digital SAT since March. They did it in August. And so students have been taking that test. It was rolled out, on purpose, of course, to try to see what are the bugs, what are the reactions, and so that they could make some changes before it debuts domestically in March 2024 here in the United States. The information coming from international students is that that it ran pretty well, that there weren't a lot of technical issues. When there were technical issues, they created delays, not stoppages. The proctors were quite well trained, so when there was a software issue, they were able to handle it. So most of the logistical process seems to have run pretty well, which bodes well for it happening also on the domestic side. As far as the content, students did feel that compared to the materials put out by the College Board as practice materials, the real exam did feel a little harder. Now, we don't know if that's because the questions were really actually harder or if it's because being there in the real test environment felt harder, but it is something to keep an eye on. And I always, as a tutor, have my students practice above the difficulty level of the exam anyways, to be prepared for just that kind of scenario. The PSAT this October, I mentioned before, is going to be a digital PSAT. This is practice. This is not something that your student needs to prepare for unless they're in National Merit Scholar consideration, which is when they're an incredibly strong tester, crushing ERBs, every standardized test they're great at, these absolute natural testers. They're the ones who might consider preparing for the PSAT. For everybody else, it's something you take usually on a Wednesday in October at school as a sophomore and junior, and it's for practicing this PSAT process, practicing getting a digital practice test so that you're prepared for the spring when it really matters as a junior. For our SAT, the big test here, it's going to debut, as I said, in March 2024. What that means is that October, November, December of this year, of 2023, are going to be paper SATs. So the December SAT exam is the final paper SAT exam. There will be no SAT in January, February, and the March SAT will be digital. And from then on, every SAT exam will be digital. As far as the overview of some of the changes in the format, the first things first is that the score will be the same. 1600 is the SAT, 800 for verbal, 800 for math. That's staying the same from the paper test and the same from, again, my dinosaur age of 1999, taking the SAT out of 1600. What has changed, of course, is that it's going to be on a computer. Okay, you're going to come to school, you're going to bring your computer, you're going to have the testing software on your computer, and you're going to take the test at a school, just as kids do today for the paper SAT and the ACT. They go to the school on a Saturday morning, or some schools will provide testing during the week, and you'll take your SAT exam with a proctor on your computer. You won't be taking it at home. It will be at a school, just like the testing is done today. But it will be an adaptive computer test. What that means is that they're going to start with a reading writing section of 27 questions. All students will get that same 27 questions. Okay, everybody across the country will get the same first, what's called a module. And then that's where the fork happens. The students who do, let's say they get 50% of the questions right, not a very high mark, 50% or less of those questions right, they're going to go on to a second section that's easier, an easier module. Okay, and their score ceiling is going to be a bit limited. The students who did better, let's say they get 75% of the questions right or better in that first module, they're going to go to a harder second module, get harder questions, and have a higher score ceiling. Their score range will be higher than the score range of students who went to the easier second module. And then the exact same thing will happen in math. All the students will get a 22 question section that's the same for everybody, and then it will fork based on how they performed in that first section. Now, the timing of that test as well will be, as I mentioned, shorter, 2 hours and 14 minutes. And so that's going to be a big change. And the reason they were able to do that was from the section adaptive nature of the test. I'm not going to get into all of the psychometrics and the really nerdy stuff about why doing it on a computer and having an adaptive test can allow you to get the same data in 2 hours and 14 minutes as in 3 hours and 15 minutes on a paper linear test. But I'm happy to go into that in the Q&A afterwards. So those are some of the format changes. But what we really care about, as a teacher, is the content changes. What's different about what they're actually answering, and this is where this is where the so what moment can kind of come. Is how are we helping our students improve? Understanding a change here in the digital SAT, the math is becoming less wordy, and interestingly, the ACT math in the last couple of years has gotten more wordy. Students are feeling that the questions are getting longer, these long paragraphs. So students who are really good at math, but have trouble when that math is presented in a longer word problem, that digital SAT is going to start to look a little better. And that ACT is following a trend that's looking a little harder in that regard. The SAT currently on paper has a non-calculator section. Okay, a section where you are not allowed to use your calculator. In the new digital SAT, you can use your calculator for all questions, just like the ACT, so they're the same in that regard. But the digital SAT has actually made their questions such that the calculator is actually really helpful for answering those questions. So for a student with perhaps moderate mathematical ability from like school academic math, but who's strong with their calculator and kind of a good gamer, they may be able to answer a lot of questions on this new digital SAT that would be harder from them from a conceptual standpoint with no calculator. On the verbal side, a big change, probably the biggest change of the test, it's the shortening of the passages. They're going from the typical 6 to 7 paragraph passages that we're all used to from standardized testing, from time immemorial, but these passages will be 1 paragraph long, followed by 1 question. So there's going to be on a verbal section, 27 individual paragraphs with 1 question after each paragraph. These are going to feature a broader range of topics than they do today, including poetry. This should not send kids running to the hills. There's not going to be a lot of poetry, but it's just showing that they're trying to sort of broaden the type of passage that the student is going to see. The third, kind of an underrated change, which I think is really important to know from a student point of view, is there's going to be a greater emphasis on vocabulary and context and transition words in context on this digital SAT. And what that means from a preparation standpoint is that there's going to be a little bit of that old SAT sort of preparation that we had to do of learning maybe some Latin and Greek roots, studying our vocabulary, broadening our vocabulary, as well as learning a little bit more about exactly how transition words are used. So transition words meaning words like however, nevertheless, conversely, accordingly, and how those can connect different pieces of information. And it's really heavily emphasized on the digital SAT. So students are going to have to really dig into that. And my so what from kind of this bullet point is that these are two things that are a little bit more difficult to learn. They're a little bit less based on patterns and a little bit more based on intuitive understanding of what vocab word sounds better in the context, what transition word sounds better in the context. For instance, the words conversely and regardless are both contrast transitions, but there's slightly different usages of the two within a sentence or a paragraph that are difficult to define the difference. Most students who get those questions right are going to hear the difference. And so that's something that's a bit more of an intuitive, subjective skill and not something that's objectively learned from a textbook as much. So that's a difference. There's going to be more time per question on the digital SAT than either the paper SAT and quite a bit more than the current ACT. So that's a big change, is that you're going to have that pacing shouldn't be as much of an issue. Certainly not as much as it is for the ACT and not as much as it was for the paper SAT that will finish up in December. As far as what test your student should take, now this is going to take more than one slide and a few personality traits, but there are some pretty strong personality bends that over the last 20 years of doing this, I've noticed over thousands of students that this type of student tends to do better in the long run on this test or that test. And so the first kind of bullet point here is the worker bee versus the smart slacker. And what that's about is that the ACT is a test that, especially with 20 years of fairly similar exams produced by the ACT, the patterns are very well set. The question types and the number of each question type that show up on each exam is fairly concrete and static. And so students who are willing to put the time in to learn, to categorize, to memorize, and to recognize on test day, they're going to benefit from that competitively. The SAT, the digital SAT, is going to be a new test. Yes, it will be related to the paper SAT. Yes, the College Board is putting out some practice materials, but let's face it, that test that comes up in March is going to be a new test. So there's not as much precedent. There's not as many patterns to follow. So in your preparation, there's less you can actively do to succeed on that March test, in my mind, than on an ACT right now. And so a student who has less time, and I say smart slacker, meaning the kind of student who we know is not going to put that work in to learn those patterns, but has a good head on his shoulders or her shoulders and their shoulders and be ready to go in and take that test confidently, even without all the color-coded note cards and everything. But also just a student who doesn't have the time to prepare, who's got a lot of sports and who has a spring musical and is on the debate team. And so they're not going to have the time to learn all those patterns from the ACT. So take the SAT. It's a bit more of an intuitive test. They're not at as much of a competitive disadvantage there as they might be taking the ACT against all of my ACT students who've put in the hours of work. That goes along with the organized to organized situation. The ACT, again, as a test based on patterns, you want to be organized in the way you approach it. The SAT, less based on patterns, so being organized is less of a priority. The ACT tends to benefit STEM kids competitively because the math is a little bit more advanced. There is a science section, and while that doesn't test really specific science from class, if you have a good comfort level with the sciences, of course, the science section is going to feel more familiar, and familiarity breeds comfort and success. As far as the reads for pleasure on the SAT side, that kind of student, I mentioned again, these vocabulary, these transition words are going to be big on this digital SAT. A student who reads a lot might have a better ear for language and have an easier time with that. Speaking of time, extended time. Students who have extended time for these exams in the past have traditionally, almost to the last one, done better on the ACT. Some people are surprised by that. The ACT is a very fast exam in standard time. So having extended time gives you a competitive advantage that you don't want to give up. And when you take the SAT, what is hard about the SAT stays hard, even if you have extended time. So in the past, the ACT has been a go-to, not just for me, but for all people in my industry. It's a very clear, if you have extended time, you're almost certainly going to take the ACT with us. With the digital SAT, we're going to have to dig in a little deeper. It's a new test. There are some changes. And so it's not as black and white as that. But in the past, that has been the case. And then as far as just the mentality of a student, the student who wants those quizzes, who wants to be challenged and do that preparation, that ACT, they tend to, the study they go in, they see the output the next day. The SAT, because of the intuitive nature of the test, it takes a little bit longer for the gradual study to show larger improvement. And so students who have that sort of mentality that say, you know, I'm just going to study, I'm going to listen, and I'm going to go in and rock it on test day. Those kids, to me, have always done really well on the SAT exam. I don't think that will change as we go from paper to digital. But realistically, as cute as this graphic is, the best way to learn about what test is better for your student is to have them take a practice exam in both. Have them do an ACT practice exam in a classroom like mine. We give a practice exam every month in Arlington, Virginia. And then we also give digital SAT exams. So they can come in one weekend, take one, another weekend, take the other test, and they have a sense of which test is better for them by looking at the score difference and about how they felt about the two exams. As far as the testing accommodations, those are not going to change very much from the paper to the digital SAT. The most common accommodation that will be available to students for both the ACT and the new digital SAT is going to be 50% extended time. That's going to be the most common. That won't change. The really big thing to note as a parent, what you really need to know going into this process is that you want to do your application for accommodations on the early side. You want to start early, maybe fall of sophomore year, investigating, is your documentation up to date? What is your counselor's plan for you? You want to apply for both tests so you know if you get denied for one test and accepted for accommodations for the other test. That's important to know in your test selection process. So to me, it makes sense to start early. If your counselor pushes you down the road a little bit, that's okay, but at least start asking the questions early, checking your documentation, your ed-psych testing, IEP, ILP, 504s, the school documentation, have that all accessible. And one thing I do want to mention, my favorite students have frankly been the ones who have had extended time accommodations, really struggled in a practice exam on the ACT, and walked out of a practice test feeling like I can't do this. And they've always ended up being my absolute best warriors, because they, when you work hard at that test, and the digital SAT, I think, will be the same, but they come out and they really come out of that test process feeling more confident about what they can achieve, even when it looks really difficult at first. So just because a student comes in and has a bad diagnostic test, that doesn't mean they can't make great leaps and bounds, and that can have a great effect beyond just the test score. And finally, just some tips for the digital SAT materials and tools that you should know about as a parent or a student preparing for the exam. The most important thing is the practice exams. You have to take full-length diagnostic tests, of course, to feel comfortable with the format, the medium, and of course, the content. Blue Book is the software, that's what it's called, Blue Book, on collegeboard.org. That's where there's going to be 4 to 6 full-length practice exams available for students to prepare for that March SAT. 4 to 6 sounds like a lot of full practice tests, but in a preparation program, even self-guided by a student, that doesn't last very long. So students need to space those tests out and use them wisely. Maybe do one test every 2 to 3 weeks with some preparation in the middle on content. And they can find that content and strategy in khanacademy.org. Khanacademy.org, if you haven't heard, it's a free online program. They do almost every high school subject, but they've partnered with the College Board to provide SAT strategy, question breakdown. It's a really, really good starting resource. For getting a little bit more detailed for verbal, I like Erica Meltzer as an author of digital SAT prep books for the verbal side. For math, using Khan Academy beyond just the digital SAT suite, doing the geometry in Khan Academy, Algebra 1, Algebra 2. You can find your weaknesses through the digital SAT prep there, and then investigate them through the math curriculums as well. And finally, something very important as far as a tool on the test, there's an on-screen Desmos calculator. A lot of students are using them at school, so they may be familiar, but the Desmos calculator will be, it's on the screen when they take the digital SAT, and it's a really useful tool, and it can answer a lot of questions for you if you know how to use it. And so that's going to be something that students who leverage that are going to get a really big bump on their math. There's a lot of free courses online for how to use Desmos. So that would be something I would point out to any student doing the digital SAT. Make sure you're very fluent in how to use a Desmos calculator, and then use it, make great use of it on the test. Finally, as far as preparation goes, when all else fails, work with Top Score. We work very hard. We'll help you pick the right test. We'll help you thoughtfully pick your timeline around the activities that your student has. We provide all the materials, teach all the strategy, master the tools together as a team. And of course, we provide peace of mind to the parents to know that they can have trust that we are holding your student accountable, and that we're working together as a tutor, as a student, as a family, and that we're all going to be aligned on the same page and have the students' best interests at heart. And so now I'd love to take some questions and try to answer any of the any of the minutia that I wasn't able to dive into during the presentation thus far, or anything even outside of this presentation.
Thank you guys so much. My name is Brian Duggan. I'm the executive director of TopScore. If you guys could just put questions, any questions that you have for Alex into the chat, I'll read through them so he's not having to toggle between the chat and answering questions. And then Alex, as we're waiting for some questions to come in, could you just talk a little bit more about what, I assume we have a lot of 11th and 12th grade families on the call, but what, if anything, 8th, 9th, and 10th grade families should be doing or thinking about as it relates to test prep, SAT, ACT, PSAT, and the college admissions process?
Sure, absolutely. For students, and of course, I get a lot of questions from parents who are, who are thinking way ahead, and they call me in 7th, 8th grade and say, what do I need to do? Should I start SAT prep now? And I say, no, please calm down. Let's think about this and say, okay, what are the skills? Think about the skills that are tested on these exams. They're meant to test the skills that you're going to need for college. And so look at the skills that you need to do well on those tests and work on those particular skills, which are grammar, reading comprehension, and mathematics. And so each of those is important outside of these exams. So if you have a 7th, 8th, 9th grader and you want to prepare them to do better on these exams in 10th, 11th grade, make sure they know how to use semicolons, colons, make sure their grammar is strong, because that's also going to help them in their history term paper. Make sure that they're reading advanced content. New York Times is great for that. All the tutor nerds, when we have students who need to be better in reading comprehension, we say read a New York Times article every single day. Another kind of scholarly newspaper publication like that. It's not super long, but it's touching on topics. It's going to make your kid also more interesting, alongside also reading advanced prose. And then from mathematics, spiraling back is very important, which means when they're in sophomore year, periodically ask them, do you remember this from freshman year? Give them a little test on something from 8th grade. Khan Academy is actually great for that, because that's what's difficult about these. The SAT and ACT are cumulative exams. So you're being tested on stuff you learned in 8th grade. And our mathematics system in the US tends to, you learn it, you get tested on it, and you forget it. And that's the problem. And so you want to constantly spiral back to old math. It's going to make you a stronger math student, which will make you a stronger tester. And that's the best way to prepare early on, is to be stronger at the skills that are eventually going to be tested on the exam.
Thank you. That's very helpful. A question that came in from a parent who is on the call. They say, seems like the first year of the digital SAT is a bad year to take this test. Should families favor the ACT this year because it's the first year that the digital SAT is rolling out?
So, I certainly feel that way. I'm going to try to leave, my soapbox, safely stowed under my seat. But whenever a new test comes out, for me, it's obviously it's an unknown, and whatever the College Board promises, we don't know exactly whether the content that shows up on the test in March is going to be what was promised. We're going to be the question types and the ratio of this question type to that question type. So I'm pulling my hair out as a tutor, making sure that I'm preparing my student the best of my ability without a pattern from which to do so. So if you have a student, and so that's the long answer, sorry, which is that, yes, I would avoid, with my kids, I would tend to avoid the unknown quantity, and I would take the known evil. But on the flip side, if you have a student who is not going to maybe have a lot of time to prepare, and for whom the ACT is not a test that fits his or her skill set, then you might want to, then you look at, say, well, all of Alex's students who have hours and hours to prepare and are going to work really hard and are good testers, they're all going to the ACT. So on the flip side, competitively, maybe that digital SAT is going to offer, less of a sort of competitive bull ring for my student who doesn't have as much time to prepare and learn these patterns. So the new test can cut a little bit both ways, but all things being equal, if you're on the fence, yes, I would personally take the known quantity. And to answer a question, sorry, that wasn't asked there, but kind of piggyback off of that, every student is going to want to take the digital SAT because it's going to sound so attractive. Oh, it's an hour shorter. Great. It's one paragraph passage instead of 7 paragraphs. Great. What's not to like? But we have to remember that that's the same for every student. Every student is going to gain that same advantage. So the test is going to feel easier for every student. And these tests are graded on a curve competitively against the kids next to you. So when you look at something like that, like the shortening of a test, the shortening of reading passages, you have to ask for yourself, is that a benefit for me beyond the benefit that it brings to the kid in the seat next to me? That is what determines whether that's a benefit of a test for you. So keep that in mind as a parent. And as you start thinking about with your kid, which test is better, and they say, oh, I'll take the shorter test with the really short passages, make sure that that is really fitting their skill set specifically and not just feeling a little bit easier.
Thank you. That's really helpful. We have another question from a parent. What if a child has already taken the SAT and they want to improve their score? Can you just talk a little bit more about how you plan to address or how we would address certain skills they need specific help on?
Sure, of course. We always prefer to get students sort of right out of, fresh with a clean slate, because then we know from the very beginning what are all of the strengths and weaknesses and build things from the ground up. But realistically, we have a lot of students who go in, do some preparation on their own, they take the test, the results come back, and that data can help us see where were some of those strengths and weaknesses. One negative of the digital SAT is that there's going to be less transparency about performance. So you're not going to know after taking a digital SAT what questions you missed. You're not going to be able to ever see what questions you missed. You will often not know how many questions you missed. So the digital SAT is going to lack some of that transparency that currently exists. So it will be a little harder from a tutoring standpoint, frankly, to take a test report and be able to identify exactly where the student is struggling. Now, at the same time, we're going to be able to look at some of those details that are provided, and we'll be able to figure out, okay, these are the math areas. We will be able to see between geometry and algebra 1, which was a greater need. And we'll be able to provide for that student the material that they need to improve in the areas where they were weaker. That's fairly straightforward, and a fairly easy part of a tutor's job is to look at test reports, see where the student is struggling, and then adjust the program to that. And then, of course, as you start to work with the student, you adjust from our normal curriculum to a curriculum based on their test report, and then it goes to a curriculum based on that student's individual personality and needs.
Next question up. How do we know for the digital SAT that different questions that different kids get are equal in assessing each student's ability? And
so
how correlated within the SAT?
So if I understand the question correctly, it will be about the question types and about whether they are that the different questions will apply. Obviously you have a lot of different kids and they're answering in theory sort of the same questions. And like I said, the first module that all students are going to get is going to be the same. And what adaptive means is that they're all going to receive those same questions. And then based on that, in that second module with the fork, they're trying to say basically that we don't, in order to better understand each individual's ability, need, strength, weakness, we need to get them into peer groups that are more realistic. And so it probably makes common sense to anybody listening that a student who is considering not going to college at all and a student who's on track for MIT probably don't need to have the exact same 44 math questions. That's not really showing the differences in their ability. Whereas when you split it up and you have students who are closer to their peers in that module, you're going to get more relevant data to saying, all right, within their peer group, how strong or weak is this student on the math? And so I don't know if that answers the question about those questions being equal in assessing a student's ability, but I hope that at least shares a little bit about the adaptive nature of the test.
A follow-up that just came in for the adaptive nature of the test. I heard that the questions keep getting harder for each question answered correctly, and you started to speak to this with the section adaptive nature of the digital SAT. So is that true? And this seems unfair for a standardized test. So can you just clarify question adaptive versus section adaptive and how that works?
Yeah, so question adaptive is when you take a test and for every question you get right, the next question that's given to you is harder. And for every question you get wrong, then you get an easier question. And of course, the higher you're able to get in that tree, the higher a score is available to you. So that's question adaptive. That's not what the SAT is going to be. The SAT is section adaptive, meaning that there's going to be that same module for everybody. And then that second module, half the nation is going to get one set of 22 math questions, and the other half of the nation is going to get the other set of 22 questions. And so it won't be question adaptive, just an entire section.
Thank you. And then we'll switch gears a little bit back to the ACT. And can you expand about why the ACT for students with accommodations, specifically the extended time accommodation, is at least historically almost certainly the better test option for them?
Certainly. So if you were, as a parent, were to sit down and take an ACT in standard time and an SAT in standard time, you would say, wow, this ACT was so fast. The clock goes so quickly. If you took the clock away, you would probably say, oh, these ACT questions are straightforward. They're clearer. They're, in a lot of places, shorter, more direct. They're less subjective. The ACT is meant to test a little bit more of facts that you've learned and a little bit less on sort of puzzles and trying to, and vocabulary. And so when you are taking the ACT in standard time, a lot of our students just simply cannot finish the ACT in standard time. And if you can't ever finish the test, it's of course going to cap your score that you can achieve. And so they take the SAT because the SAT provides more time per question. And so that's the better test for them. However, students who have extended time on the ACT, in most cases, are able to finish the test in time and usually actually have a little extra time. And so what that does is that turns the test in, that takes away what's really hard about the ACT, which is the pacing. And that takes away this huge barrier. And once you take that away, the test really opens up to you. The SAT, what's hard about the SAT doesn't get easier if you have more time. It's about choosing a vocabulary word in context or figuring out the tone of these two Victorian women who are talking, who seem like they're really nice, but they actually really hate each other. That doesn't become easier with more time to read it again. And so you gain a competitive advantage in the ACT when you get extended time, whereas on the SAT, it might help you to finish the test in time, but you're not really gaining an advantage against other students competitively. And again, as I mentioned before, this test, you always have to think about what I'm doing in the context of what the kid next to me is doing as well. And so that ACT has, for a long time, for all industry leaders in test preparation, if you have extended time, that's going to be the better test for you, as long as you're willing to work hard to learn those test patterns.
Thank you. And we'll do our final call for any remaining questions. Please put those into the chat or the Q&A. And we have 2 questions remaining as of now before we pass it back over to Wendy. Can you talk a little bit, Alex, about what common pitfalls parents and students fall into when they're trying to decide on a test prep timeline and decide those ideal 4 to 6 months that their students can be preparing over?
Sure, absolutely. The biggest mistake that I see, one, it's overestimating the student's maturity. So something that is, really taken hold in the last 5 years. A lot of parents have wanted their kids to do their test preparation the summer after sophomore year. So the summer between sophomore and junior year, they study all that summer and they take the test early in the fall and can hopefully be done with their testing in time to really focus on junior year academics. It makes sense. It makes all the sense in the world. But a lot of students aren't mature enough at that point to spend their summer doing test prep. And from a mathematical standpoint, they might not be there. So it can be a great program for a lot of students, but I have started a lot of programs in that way because parents wanted it. And the students sort of said, sure, okay, yeah, that makes sense, I'll do it. But then we actually got to it and it was 11 a.m. on a Tuesday in summer and they didn't want to be there and they weren't in the right headspace to do it. So starting early, it works great for some students. You just got to make sure it's great for your student. So that's one big pitfall that I see. Being afraid to start a little bit on the later side. Again, every student is going to have a different pathway. So some students are going to do better starting in the spring for their test preparation and taking the test in the spring and in the summer. Some of their peers might be starting earlier, and that might give them some anxiety that they feel like they're behind. But again, if it's the best timeline for them with their activities and their extracurriculars, then they've got to sort of cancel out all the noise.
We will go with 2 more questions, then we'll pass it back to Wendy to make sure that we're ending with a hard stop of 1 o'clock. But Alex and myself and Wendy and the whole team here at Illuminos and Top Score, we're happy to stay on the call after 1 o'clock, answer any individual or specific questions that you have. So let's go with this most recent question that just came in, Alex. Do we really need these tests given that many colleges are going test optional?
I mean, it's a great question. And I think that that's also something that we'll get a better picture of kind of each year as we go forward the next 2 or 3 years and we get further away from COVID and schools become a little bit more clear with their data about who they're accepting and who they're not. Right now it's if you can get a really strong score, of course it's going to help you. That goes without saying, is that score will be a positive, on your record. So that if you can get a strong score, every college counselor who I've spoken to says, of course, prepare for the test, get great scores, add that data point. That's kind of a no-brainer. So the question really becomes for students who, if we know realistically, they're going to work their butts off and give a good faith effort, but their score is never going to rise very high. Is it worth it for them to invest that time, those resources, when there are so many college options that are test optional? And I think that the test optional sort of landscape it's great for that students. I do think it builds some anxiety because, again, there are more choices to make. They will have lots of options. So if that process is going to be something that's too expensive for the family, that's too emotionally draining for the student, that's going to make them unhappy, then go test optional. That's totally fine. Just be willing to understand that probably you'll have to apply to a few more schools. You may have a few fewer options. It doesn't mean that you won't get into a great school that's great for your students. So I think that on both sides of the spectrum, students are a little bit flippant and think, oh, I don't have to take these tests because they're test optional, not taking into account that that's going to impact the doors that you have open to you. But on the flip side, also, there's still a little bit of that pressure that says, well, because I took the test, my kid has to, and that's not the path for everybody anymore. And so if that ends up being the path that's best for your family and your student, don't give it a second thought. They're going to get a great test optional school, and don't feel less than by taking that path by any means.
Absolutely. And then final question here. Would you consider preparing a 9th grader for the PSAT who absolutely kills it on the ERBs, reads for pleasure, has a strong ear for language, but has executive functioning issues, dislikes long math word problems? And if so, how would you start in a low-key way? And then to the family that asked this, just to preface, this might be more than a couple of minute answer to this question. So we're happy to stay on and talk more specifically about your student after Wendy gives some closing remarks too.
All right. So sorry, but did you want me to answer?
Do you want me to do that first so you can answer, or do you want to go ahead and answer, Alex?
I'll give the short version, and then I can go in a little bit deeper if anybody wants to stick around. There's a short answer here. Will be that understanding timeline. The 10th grade PSAT is purely for practice. So if you take the 10th grade PSAT and you get a perfect score, it doesn't matter. You don't get anything for it. You can't send it to colleges. There's no national merit, anything. It's the junior year PSAT for which you get the national merit scholarship opportunity. So that's one thing to take into consideration, that if you were going to prepare, it would really be for the 11th grade PSAT, not the 10th grade PSAT. Starting early to build some of those skills. I always look at it, if we can do it in a way that's going to help them overall with their academia, then that's a go, and I like it, but only if we have those right sort of glasses on and the right perspective about it. And as far as executive functioning issues, anybody like me who's put a lot of thought into programming always starts every strategy from the point of view of how would a student with executive functioning issues approach this, because we take those same strategies and I use them in my everyday life because they make you more organized and make you a stronger linear thinker. And so don't discount a student's ability to be great on these tests because they just need to help reframe the way that they approach these tests.
Thank you guys so much. Alex, this has been incredibly helpful and insightful, and thank you for answering so many questions. I'm glad we had time for that. I want to thank everybody that's on the call for joining us, and thank you for giving us your time today. I hope we were able to answer your questions. The mom who asked that last question, feel free to stay on and we're happy to talk to you further. If anybody else has questions, if you need help with executive functioning support for your student, we are very similar to Alex and Brian and their team, how they do things. We provide one-on-one in-home or virtual support customized for your child. So feel free to reach out if we can help support executive functioning needs. And if you need Alex and Brian's information or contact information and you didn't get it here, Alex or Brian, why don't you pop that into the chat for everyone so they can quickly get that down. And you can also reach out to us at any time. Here's our information up on the screen, and you can always reach me at heywendy@illuminos.co. So it's just hey, and then my first name, Wendy, at Illuminos. And we don't have an M on the end of our URL. So don't think you're writing it incorrectly. That's actually, it's .co. So thank you so much to Alex, Brian, and John, who's in the background here, and the entire Top Score team for putting this together and presenting it. We will have a recorded version of this posted on our website by the end of next week, and we'll send you an email letting you know when that's up. Feel free, please, to share this with others that weren't able to attend. Feel free to share it with anyone who you think it would be helpful for. These guys are great. They're here to answer questions. You can always reach out to them, or if you're not sure how to get them, reach out to us. So thank you again for your time today, and we are very appreciative that you signed up. We will be sending out notice of our next webinar very soon. So thank you, guys. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to see if Mom does want to stay on the call. If you want to type another question or anything, we can go ahead and answer that, or I can actually just allow you to speak.
Thank you, Wendy.
Thanks. Allison?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So, hi, Wendy. It's great to see you. And,
Hi, nice to see you on. I saw that you read that question.
hi, Alex and Brian. Yeah, so this was just kind of interesting for me because my daughter is just starting 9th grade. But as you describe it, the kid who has always killed the standardized testing, but has serious executive function challenges in life. And I love your approach that only, raise this if it's also going to help with everyday schoolwork, which is the time challenge. I also love your thought of read a New York Times article every day, which I think she does some of. She reads for pleasure. That's always been her passion. When she was in 4th or 5th grade, she took whatever the Lexile test is, and it came out between high school and New York Times. So, I'm wondering, maybe she is the kid for whom the PSAT will have some significance because her grades may end up being uneven in high school. We'll see. She's coaching with Illuminos, so maybe the executive function will help. But she's always been a strong tester. She's liked tests. She's not somebody that I would want to put a lot of pressure on right now to, do a bunch of formal test prep. But if there are other strategies like reading the New York Times or word problems or whatever, I'd be interested.
Absolutely. And so I like, for math, sort of in that regard, I as I mentioned before, I do like Khan Academy, and for kids who sort of like testing, it provides a really nice curriculum in a way that is easy to sort of track and follow, and kind of can do quizzes and get validation. And but as far as getting more tactical about the PSAT for students who have a chance, who are kind of curious about their potential for that 11th grade PSAT and national merit consideration, some of them do very light preparation for 10th grade PSAT for that practice, just to get a sense of whether they're in the ballpark. So that's the kind of thing that 3 to 4 months before, start doing, very limited to keep the stress down, an hour and a half a week of doing a little bit of math, a little bit of grammar study, taking some of that more general reading comprehension and sort of seeing it in that test format, and then going in 10th grade with absolutely no pressure and seeing where the strengths and weaknesses are, see where the score is, and have a sense of whether that 11th grade one that really counts is that worth kind of preparing for in greater, with more profound effort. But at this level, 8th, 9th grade, 10th grade, for the most part, we're talking about improving that general reading comprehension, spiraling back to 8th, 9th grade math, really. And I know it sounds like simplistic and sometimes kids roll their eyes, but they really do lose those foundations very quickly when they're not looking back at them. And then building those grammar skills. And those three things, that will help prepare her for the preparation that she does, so that she's seeing things that are familiar, rather than a lot of our kids who feel like they're relearning everything from 7th grade on.
Yeah, and sometimes there's an anxiety component there. So, just knowing what's coming, and that's something that our coach can definitely work on. And we're happy to do that. And, obviously we can reach out to Alex or Brian. I do recommend them for the actual test prep. We do not do the test prep. I don't want to take on that responsibility, to be perfectly frank. I want to be good at what we're good at and send to others what they're good at. But we can always do some Khan Academy. We can do some exploration with what kind of questions she'd have and things like that. So I hope that helps. And Allison, go ahead.
It might intrigue her. I was also curious about the calculator you mentioned that I hadn't heard of. Is that something that's used for other applications, or is it only within the test taking, confines?
The Desmos, the calculator, and to be clear, I didn't want to get into like too much in the weeds. For the tests for both PSAT and SAT, kids are also allowed to bring their own calculator, certainly, so they don't have to use the Desmos calculator. But what the tutor nerds like me have found is that the test really lends itself to the capabilities of that Desmos calculator. It is used by some school systems, by some school communities. They use it very widely, and some other schools, nobody's ever heard of Desmos. So it's something that I think will probably, as so much of our world goes online, I do think that it's something that's going to become a more widespread, something that in college, I would imagine that very soon in college, you're not going to have kids carrying around these big bulky TI-84 calculators, that everyone's going to have it online. So that seems to me to be the direction we're going in, like it or not. So it's one of those things. I mean, frankly, Desmos is fairly new to me, that I started to really learn it because of the SAT and ACT. But I would imagine that students will find that they're using it for their econ classes in college and all that as well. So probably multiple benefits beyond just the PSAT and SAT.
Wonderful. Thank you for taking the time to answer.
Sure, of course, my pleasure.
Susan, you stayed on. Did you have any questions? I just saw that she stayed on. Oop, she dropped. Okay. I just wanted to make sure I got everybody's questions. Allison, have a great afternoon. Okay. You guys, thank you so much. We will talk soon. And I really appreciate your time.